very excited to welcome Mr. Antoine Grant, a great friend of mine, to the table. This is a conversation that's going to dive into who Antoine is, but I'll just kind of start with the end in mind. He recently closed on a pretty significant transaction. He bought a business. We'll dive into that. About 30 million in revenue. Great dude, family man. What I would consider to be in my inner circle, and I think is really interesting to kind of share some of his insights fresh off the presses around what he's up to, how he got there, a little bit of his background and his philosophy around ownership, which is what ultimately Gravy is all about. So with that being said, Antoine, excited to have you, have this conversation, have people, learn a little bit more about who you are and what you're up to and kind of what your vision is. So welcome, my
I
man.
appreciate it. Appreciate that, Brandon. Appreciate the kind words and always a pleasure.
Absolutely. So look, let's just, we're gonna split this conversation to like past, present, and future. Give us a little bit of a glimpse to who Antoine is, what shapes you coming up, where you're from, some of that background insight to help kind of shape our view on where you're coming from.
Gotcha. Yeah, Antoine Grant, born and raised in Los Angeles. My father's from Costa Rica. My mom is American. Um, Always been dabbling in entrepreneurship from a young age, creating side companies while I was in elementary school, middle school, high school, college as well too. Ultimately became a consultant. Worked for two large management consultancies. First time advising very large Fortune 500 companies on performance improvement activities around the United States. Also did a stint in Australia. The second time advising almost exclusively pre-IPO companies, venture capitalists, folks in growth equity. Between those two stints, I worked in education as well as technology extensively. So venture-backed startups, one that went IPO not too recently, as well as on the product development, business development side, and then advising and investing in technology companies as well too. Most recently, I ran large P&L for Wayfair, which is a home furnishing, home decor, home improvement online marketplace. And that was when I really kind of went from being an internal strategist or part of a machine to really turning the dials and being able to see what happens and interacting with customers and suppliers. And most recently, I purchased a company in the home furnishing, home decor, and home improvement space. So very excited about the transaction. It's combined a lot of passions that I've had over the last, almost 40 years here. That feels weird to say, but it combines a lot of the work that I did as a strategy consultant, which is going in and analyzing years of data and how the business functions and figuring out how to create a better engine for that business, as well as the strategy piece, so creating the growth initiatives. And then the last piece, of course, is being an operator. So actually being responsible for individuals, for the P&L, for making sure that we don't run out of money, to make sure that the customers are excited and delighted by the services and products that we provide. So that's kind of the full journey.
Yeah, lots of unpack in there for sure. And we gonna do that, but let's start with you're from LA, right? And LA is an interesting city. It's a city of dichotomies, I guess you could say. How would you characterize your upbringing, like your environment that you were in, kind of what shaped you, both at home, but maybe in your environment in LA? Like, help us understand a little bit more around what your reality was growing up in LA.
Yeah, I really have nothing bad to say about Los Angeles. I spent the formidable years of my life here. I spent almost a decade in New York, and now my family and I are back here in Los Angeles. Growing up, my parents were electrical engineers, so they actually removed themselves, or I guess, are transplants from New York. My dad moved to New York when he was about 14 years old, and they had to figure out their community. So that community became parents at the schools that I went to, as well as families in the church that I grew up in as well too. So they were always around, always pushing me to actually break down problems, make new friends, and continue moving forward the same way that they did. They didn't really have a safety net, right? And so they worked super hard, continue to work super hard. but they were always present. Um, my middle school and high school experience, I went to Brentwood School, which is a school on the west side of LA. And that really opened up my eyes to the possibilities of entrepreneurship and ownership. Um, you're taught to work hard. You're taught that there's a variety of career paths that people that work hard should go into: engineering, legal profession, being a doctor. But really, kind of got a glimpse of small business owners and financial professionals and folks that were doing jobs that were very difficult to explain. And that always piqued my interest. And so, even though I went down a track of exploring law and medicine, I ultimately ended up in management consulting by running into an older friend of mine that came back to campus, and we were both in the entrepreneurship group. And he said, "Look, like this is how you actually get a seat at the table. You get to see what the most pressing strategic ideas and initiatives are that these leaders are wrestling with, and you're able to propose recommendations." And so that's how I ultimately ended up in consulting, and did that in Los Angeles as well.
Got it. So you talk a little bit around like being exposed to this idea of ownership and that really kind of fueling some of decision making. Give us a little bit more around, looking back, what was that insight for you? How did you then form your set of experiences to lead to kind of this place where you are now, where you've now bought a company, you acquired a company of scale? Help us understand a little bit more just around your philosophy and how you kind of drove your career experiences, and if ownership was the end goal, how you kind of contextualize where you started to kind of where you ended up today.
Yeah, I guess the first big observation was a lot of the parents that I was surrounded around all owned some form of business, right? They worked very hard. They worked 24/7. They also had a lot of freedom, right? So they controlled their schedule, and I watched how it stacked over time, right? It wasn't necessarily linear like it is in a lot of folks that have corporate careers. They would have big outcomes. There were celebrations. People were moving to different homes. They were publicly speaking about partnerships or different milestones that they were achieving, um, and that started to sit with me. Right? Wait a minute. There's a different way to do this than just looking for recognition from a larger corporate body, right? And I was constantly searching for, like, how do you make that happen, right? How do you actually find the opportunities, have the backing from capital providers, but also people within your network to go and take that type of. I mean, it is a risk, of course, like anything. But if you're surrounded and you have the right opportunity, and it's not as much of a risk as it might appear. And getting to that point, hopefully, will allow you to have a step change or springboard to other opportunities. Um, so it's probably a long way to answer your question, but really it was about just observing, right, and seeing how people lived, how they were able to kind of move from opportunity to opportunity without fear, right, because they had something that was creating value for them, whether they were there or whether they weren't, and couldn't be taken away from them, right? So that mentality, that situation that I saw was ingrained in me, right? And I was trying to figure out, how can I get there?
So ingredients are exposure. So getting real examples of people doing things that, you said this could be interesting. Some of it is risk, and maybe watching these people move around and saying, wait a second, like, if I'm willing to step out there, it may not be as daunting as maybe people perceive it to be, because the outcome is well worth that risk. And I think we'll put a pin on the risk conversation, because I want to come back to your philosophy on that in a second. And then the last piece really is almost kind of having this sense of, control. This can't be taken
Right.
away from you. This is something that ultimately creates value, whether you're there or not. Obviously, you're working. And that's actually where I want to go next. Because really, when we're talking about this kind of life work situation, there's the traditional employee corporate track. There is some variation of kind of entrepreneurship, in many different flavors. When you talk about like this idea of um, control, like help me understand, what is it when somebody is in a corporate situation? what is it that makes people really, embrace that as the default kind of path, having been exposed to both the owners and the employees, and you can have a very lucrative, successful career in corporate. But when you think about that, what do you think people may not get or may not really fully appreciate when you're looking at 25, 30 years of work on the front end around the difference between these two tracks if you're going to be working hard either way?
Yeah. Um, it's an interesting question because I do love the corporate environment, right? There's something intoxicating about being part of a large institution and people kind of associating a lot of the prestige of that organization to you, right? So the access that you get, the respect that you get, the benefit of the doubt that you get, um, feels good, and I think a lot of people don't want to admit that, but it does, right? So that's kind of the A point. The B point is that it is inherently less risky, right? Um, you kind of know what you need to do in a lot of these places in order to succeed. A lot of it isn't necessarily 100% metric driven, right? It's not dollars coming in versus dollars going out. There's a matrix of qualities that they're looking for, and reviews that they're collecting from other folks in order to create a picture of you, sponsors that actually pull you up. And if you leave, you kind of have a decent amount of time to figure out what your next step is, right? So very rarely is it immediate. I know in the current economic environment, that might seem like that's not the case, but even so, uh, there's an understanding that happens if there is an unforeseen event because of the economic malaise that we're in, and so that's comforting, right? Entrepreneurship is foreign to a lot of folks because a lot of folks aren't surrounded by people that are truly entrepreneurs or owners of businesses at scale. So for the folks that are around it, it's almost second nature for those individuals, right? But it's a very few the set of individuals that actually are constantly surrounded by individuals that are owning and operating businesses are small. And if you look at that set of folks that are surrounded by entrepreneurs and owner operators, typically most of them are entrepreneurs and owner operators, right? So those skills, right, those relationships are held close and kind of passed down or around to folks that are within that environment, within that situation, within that circle. So hopefully that answers your question, right? It feels good to be part of corporate, and because you're not necessarily privy to being around a lot of entrepreneurs and operators in an intimate way, where you're going to get these um, not just opportunities, but the the mentality, right? Or the actual truth behind the press releases of what it takes to get in, to stay in, to succeed, to step back, to continue to move forward. It's going to be very daunting to actually jump in. And I think that last point is super important because a lot of people believe that they know how to be an entrepreneur or what it takes to be an entrepreneur from reading articles or books, um, or what is projected kind of in the media. And oftentimes there's a lot more that happens behind the scenes for that individual to get to where they are or to own what they currently have.
Yeah, and something I want to dive into a little bit more is kind of this risk piece. And so it sounds like if you're exposed to owner operators, you see that outcome, you see its material, and it's almost like, look, I'm gonna put in the work the same way a banker, managing director, or a partner in consulting, there is work that needs to be put in, but the outcome does not feel as real for folks that haven't kind of been surrounded. So in some ways, you could actually make the argument that there's almost like a distortion around the risk of entrepreneurship if you are not necessarily exposed to that core group. I think the other piece that's a big issue for a lot of people is just the access to capital, right? Or at least, and I think these are kind of in some ways related, right? It's like if you're coming up in an environment where you have a bunch of owner operators, they understand this game. And if you're putting in the work with something that is an interesting opportunity that creates value, they're likely to be the same people who might say, you know what? you're the young version of me. I see a lot of myself in you and what you're doing. I'm willing to mentor, potentially invest in, et cetera, et cetera. So tell me a little bit about some of, if you get past that risk piece, what are some of the other pieces, barriers that, you know, people may or may not have misconceptions around as far as being surmountable or not? You know, on the one side, you mentioned that risk is something that maybe people could think about differently by surrounding themselves around other folks. But once you're ready to make that plunge, there's some other elements you need as well. Curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Um, Capital is something that everyone comes back to, right? Access to capital in order to actually purchase something, build something, or give you the runway to figure out what to do. So I'm not going to downplay the importance of capital. Um, but what I will also say is there's a, many different ways to actually become an entrepreneur, right? And so you think that it is, a lot of people think that it is raising a lot of money, driving down the 405, having an idea, right, that solves a pain point for you, and then picking up a technical co-founder if you're not, that person, and then building a product that eventually raises more money, and then you have extreme success, right? And I'm truncating it, but in generalizing, but a lot of people, that's how they think. That's how they think about being a tech entrepreneur, right, or being an entrepreneur in general. But there's many ways, and some ways don't require that much capital. Others you can enter with creative solutioning, right? And so speaking to a guy yesterday who bought a company that was around for, I want to say, over 50 years or so, and the guy that owned it, was retiring, and he convinced him to come in and actually take over the operations for an equity stake, right? And now that company, it's been 14 years, but they have growth equity behind them. They're doing quite well. I'm not going to say what the company is, but many people would know what it is, right? And that's an entrepreneur as well, right? He came in, he took over a company, he owns and operates the company, moved it from wholesale to being retail to being a branded player versus being somebody behind the scenes, raised money, created jobs, created value. That's a path a lot of people can take, right? But it's an atypical path. And there's many other paths to ownership and operating and creating value and creating jobs that people should explore. So to answer your question, like, capital is big, right? Of course. I think another one is being resourceful and being creative and understanding that it's not going to be a straight line. Everything looks like a straight line in the rearview mirror, but it's not. There's a lot of twists and turns and creativity that's going to be required to get to where you want to get to. And then the last bucket would probably be support, right? If you're in a family of entrepreneurs, they kind of get it, right? If you're not, then you're going to have to deal with a lot of doubters, a lot of people that are saying, hey, look, like, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't make financial sense. The risk reward isn't there. Like, you could be here making X, and now you're over here spending Y. Why? You know? And that's hard. That's hard for a lot of people to get beyond that, because you have to walk out the door every day or in the door every day and look people in the face that don't really understand what you're doing or why you're doing what you're doing. And so staying positive in those environments, in those situations where you might not have a circle of people that understand the entrepreneurial journey, is incredibly important and incredibly hard, and definitely a hurdle.
Yeah, a lot in there, man. You just dropped definitely some gems, and I can relate to a lot of that. And we'll get in a minute to like this idea of, a peer group that can help reinforce, validate, help you keep that fortitude as you kind of muscle through this phase of uncertainty where people don't really get what you're doing and why you're doing it, and kind of you maybe second guessing some of these decisions. But before I go there, I want to go a little bit into timing. So you've had a portfolio of experiences. I would say if you kind of break it up, you're a very analytical guy because I know you, but it's primarily around strategic, work combined with like business development work, and then a little bit of, general management work as well. But you went to, Claremont McKenna, you got your MBA from Wharton, You've been at the blue chip brands, the McKinseys of the world. You've been a general manager at Wayfair. You've had a number of entrepreneurial experiences as well. And so, having been exposed to these kind of owner operators early on, how did you know what was the amount of training, grooming, learning you need to have in a more structured environment? How did you kind of navigate when you felt like you need what you need to be ready? And was that just a function of like, let me get these skills, or was it a function of, I just don't really know what that path is yet. So, let me just, play around with different things until I get to that space of clarity.
Yeah. Um, I would love to say that I had it all mapped out, right? And that it was a straight line to get to where I am right now. But that's not the case. It definitely won't be a straight line going forward either. Um, I think the big thing for me at this point was coming to the realization through coaching and through picking the words that I'm going to actually internalize from mentors and sponsors, um, uh, and translating it into something that I can use. And what I mean by that is I had to be really honest with myself on what I'm good at, right? And early on, I did try a lot of different things, right? So I created um, a custom clothing company on the side while I was working. I did a variety of different things. Um, but with this one, it was very, very clear that I understood the business, right? The market just in general. I knew what value I can add in terms of performance improvement, right? So tightening up the operations of this business. I knew how to bring in talent and bring in other partners because I had those relationships, and I knew how to actually steer the company towards certain growth initiatives. But that was very clear. It wasn't forced, right? It's like, if you're a basketball player and you want to be a great shot blocker, but you have a great 3-point shot, should you continue to try to work on those skills of being a shot blocker because that's how you view yourself, or should you actually understand that this is where I can add value? Let me double down on it. And it took years for me to kind of get to that realization, right? Of looking in the mirror and saying, okay, like this is actually what you're good at. This is what you've been prepared to do. Go and take advantage of this opportunity, which matches your skill set and matches your relationships. Versus, I think that this is an awesome opportunity, an awesome market. This is how I want to be viewed. I'm smart. I can figure this out, right? The ease of going into the opportunity, the ability to actually negotiate in my current situation was much stronger. The conversations with capital providers was much easier, and the results have come quicker, right? Because I'm not learning on the job, right? I'm actually able to strategize and execute simultaneously, right? Versus coming up with fictitious models or beautiful PowerPoint spreadsheets and trying to convince myself that that is the value that I can bring. I don't know. Is that clear? Does that make
Oh,
sense?
that's great. And I want to unpack the deal in a second, but um, a couple things that you mentioned kind of stand out, and I want to dive into a little bit. In some cases, people would make the argument like, I'm not doing X because this is something I really don't enjoy doing, right? So that thing that you're getting the most reinforcement from a for all the reasons you just laid out might be the easiest path. But let's say you're like, I hate bathroom, in furniture and in that business. It doesn't really do anything for me. So let's talk about true norths for a minute and how you reconcile those two. I know for you, knowing you, it's about ownership. It's about building a platform. It's about building a portfolio, a lot of complementary activities. How do you reconcile this idea of like, is this something that really fires me up versus something that may be lucrative, but I'm not necessarily, you got one life to live. I'm not necessarily feeling like this is, my ideal use of time, because this is just not something that really resonates with me.
Yeah.
How would you reconcile that?
Yeah, I think in my opinion, this is just my point of view. I think people love to draw boxes or say, okay, it's either this or it's that. I don't like bathrooms and kitchen renovations, but I do like dance and theater, or I do like music, or I do like sports, and I think everything's a lot more complicated than that, right? So you throw me into an environment where, let's say I love sports, and you throw me into, any job within sports. There's no guarantee that I'm actually going to like being an accountant for the Lakers, right? And so with kitchen and bathroom renovations, with home renovation, interior design, like if design isn't your thing, but project management is something that brings you joy, or problem solving just in general is what brings you joy, or interacting with people is what brings you joy, then find that joy in that opportunity, right? But don't just say, okay, I need to be in this market because this is what I believe that I like. There's a lot of people that are um, very unhappy in the industries that they believed they wanted to be a part of, right? And there's a lot of people that are extremely happy in, boring industries, right? Because they found aspects of it that they really enjoy, right? And with everything, I think we need to understand that there's layers and there's complexity, right? And through any journey, you need to realize that things are fleeting, right? So even though you might not enjoy it at this moment in time, right, you're being long-term greedy, right? So that is just one waypoint on your path to ultimate success and fulfillment, right? And reward, and achieving kind of your goals. So that's how I have grown to view opportunities in the world, right? And I got this early on in consulting. I have this idea, okay, I want to work in technology, and then you get staffed on a project where your job is to figure out how to sell more insurance on top of this SaaS solution. And it's with a group of people that you might not fully enjoy working with. And you're like, man, I got that wrong. And then the next project, you're like, I don't really want to go work on a commercial bakery, right? But you're like, man, I actually like figuring out how to optimize the production lines, right? And how to negotiate these contracts in a new and interesting way, and figuring out how to pull more money down to the bottom line, right? And improve, X, Y, and Z aspects of the business. Oh, okay, that's cool. So I can find joy working for a commercial bakery, for an equipment line, or equipment rental company, right? And some of these more boring type of companies, and be frustrated and anxious and angry in these roles at companies where people are celebrating the fact that I get to work on that particular project or within that organization. So that's kind of the perspective that I've gotten with time, which is, don't just say, okay, it's either this or it's that, right? It's figuring out, okay, what are all of the components of this particular opportunity that I'm in? What am I really good at? What do I like? And how do I find joy kind of in that situation? Hopefully it's a large market and it's the right opportunity.
Got it. Got it. Very, I think, useful and practical perspective on that. All right. So let's fast forward a little bit. You've accumulated a wide range. Would you call yourself a journalist or a specialist? Let's start there.
Um, I like to be seen as a specialist. I definitely have a generalist toolkit. I took a lot of pride in kind of being a generalist, but as I've gotten older, I've realized that I do have very specific things that I can add probably outsized value on. So
Would be
which would be on the analysis side, right? And the strategic analysis side. So actually, there are a lot of folks that are data folks, right? And they can build much better models than I can, for sure. What I pride myself on is actually seeing um, kind of the nuance behind that analysis, right? And being creative in how you actually use kind of what is to create what could be, and creatively figuring out how to get there. I think relationship building is another thing as well. Understanding why people are in a certain role, and keeping them motivated within the roles that they're in, if they're part of the organization that you're at, or in the company that you're at. Um, and then the last two things are kind of staying positive, and being resourceful. So those would be kind of the things that I think that I'm good at. And then if you're talking about a market, right now, it's definitely home furnishing, home decor, home improvement. That market, I understand. I understand the dynamics between supplier, and retailer and customer, online and offline, et cetera, since I've spent a decent amount of time in it.
Yeah. And knowing you, I would throw two other attributes in there. And I think one of them falls under the strategic thinking piece, which is um, adaptability. I think you're a very flexible guy. You know how to bob and weave pretty much whatever's coming your way. And I think that's something that does not come easy to a lot of people. The second piece I would say is urgency. You move with a sense of urgency and speed. That I think is something that, I think everyone would agree, all things created equal. Speed usually gets better results. A lot of people like to measure and cut, particularly strategic people. I think you've balanced action, well with, kind of getting enough of the data to feel somewhat confident about where you're going, but really acknowledging the fact that speed and moving quickly with urgency is a big part to kind of move momentum towards, the way you're looking to go. So let's talk about this transaction. You've been around a little bit. You dibbled and dabbled with some things. Ultimately became very clear to you, like, I have a specific set of insights that can be applied to an industry, and ultimately, a platform where I can, acquire one, maybe more companies, and really do some interesting things in the space, which came from you having exposure in a previous role there. Maybe not clear at that point, this is where you're going to lead in, but ownership was like the true north, and you're kind of exploring, how do I get there and how do I leverage my full set of benefits? And then it clicked. So let's get into the weeds a little bit. So first off, buying a business is something that we talk a lot about in Gravy, because we think about paths to ownership. Buying a business is not a new concept at all, but there's a couple of dynamics that I think are interesting now. The first is, I think a lot of folks are not, really truly appreciating how many businesses are out there that are going to be sold within the next 10 years. A lot of folks, I think, are coming to understand now, as we've evolved from like a retirement centric, stay with a company forever type of model, and we've seen the evolution of, across the last few decades, to like people really being like, I'm gonna hop here there every 3-4 years, I'm kind of going to get paid here, and I'm going to transition to someone else. And so when you have that kind of free agent mentality, you start to say, okay, like, what is the ultimate embodiment of that? And so buying a company, if you feel like you have the skills, could be interesting, particularly for people that you know, minorities, particularly, who feel like they're kind of having to assimilate and bend over backwards in ways that they feel like they may not have to, but take on the problems and the challenges that come with being an owner at the same time. So there's a lot happening. When you first started out, looking at this, acquiring a business piece, was it more opportunistic on like, okay, I understand my sweet spot, let me focus on this space? Did an opportunity pop up and then you just kind of contextualize it around, I think I could, I'm putting the pieces together, I think this might be like a once in a lifetime opportunity, let me go for it? Or did you say, look, I'm looking to buy a business, I'm kind of focusing on this as my lane, and then, let me find the right company that, that makes sense for me right now?
Yeah. Um, I will say that there's been a lot of inputs that led to this point, right? I had a professor at Wharton, Bob Borghese, who's actually my lawyer, and couldn't have done this transaction without him. That taught entrepreneurship through acquisition, right? And on the last class, you're probably gonna be upset at me for talking about this, but he stood up and he gave basically a 30-minute speech about risk and about how folks in our position really need to consider buying something that is working or could work better, and using it as a platform for future growth. So that stuck with me, right? It was like, huh, okay, like I'd always known that people buy things that are working, or come in and take control of things. This is what I did as a consultant, right? As a strategist, not as an owner, and figuring out how to make it more profitable and to grow. And so that was kind of lodged in the back of my head. It was like, okay, there's multiple paths. There's this path that you read about, in the Wall Street Journal and TechCrunch, and then there's this other path. And quite honestly, as I started to really think about, his words, right, and what I learned through entrepreneurship through acquisition, I realized that a lot of folks over here actually had executed that strategy. They didn't really talk about it, right? Either they were early investors and stepped in as CEO, and there's a lot of prominent CEOs right now that did that, or they acquired something and they repositioned it, right? They actually put a new company, a new wrapper, a new strategy around that, and then grew it from there. So it was like, okay, well, even the folks over here have considered that, right? And then as you grow M&A, and I know this from advising a lot of fast-growing pre-IPO companies, has become a core strategic competency of those organizations, right? Typically, the companies on their path towards IPO do 2, 3, 4 acquisitions of varying scale, but they do some acquisitions. A lot of them aren't good with integration. Some of them are really good. The ones that actually are really good with integrations see a step change in growth, right? Um, so that was kind of the first kind of nugget, which was like, okay, like you should really, really think about entrepreneurship through acquisition. The second thing was just really getting my arms around a market and a set of opportunities, right? In the area that I'm playing in, where you're allowed to kind of or able to connect dots in an interesting way, right? You know the overall market trends, you know what's going on with competitors, you know the frustrations of customers intimately. You've probably experienced a lot of them on your own, so it just becomes very clear. It's like, huh, okay, this industry is hundreds of billions of dollars. It's not going anywhere. You know, I did a stint at Compass as well too, early days, right? So I kind of understood the home buying process, you know, the agents that are involved, how people make these decisions, what decisions they make after it, what adds value to a home, et cetera. So coupling that with the experience at Wayfair, experience advising companies at McKinsey, um, things just started to become clear, right? It's like this is a large market. The market or the industry will continue to be brought online, right? And we're seeing a lot of things happen now, right, with closures of physical retailers. And then you had a period in time where capital was not going to be and still isn't as readily available, right, for 0 to 1. So in this economic environment, people can wait, right? And you have to make them move versus having that FOMO. So all those things combined, you know, led me to realize that this was probably the opportunity to go out and execute on a strategy through the acquisition of an existing asset. And that's kind of where we are today.
Got it. So unpack the transaction for us. So you
Yeah.
came from a background running the kitchen and bathroom business for Wayfair.
Yep.
You had a sense that buying a business made sense for a bunch of the reasons you just said. Um, Tell us how this deal came to be. Tell us a little bit more about the details of the deal, how
Yeah.
long it took you to kind of work through this process of getting to close, which just happened, by the way. Congratulations. I think, what, 2 weeks ago now?
Right. Right.
So now you're operating the company, so we can talk a little bit about that as well. But just how did this kind of unfold?
Yeah. So it's a good question because it basically dovetails or continues from my last answer. Uh, I understood the opportunity, right, and the market, and I started to jot down a strategy, right? Okay, this is where I think the gap in the market is. This is how you can build $1 billion business between the toes of giants. And then I went out and started speaking to companies, right? Suppliers, manufacturers. I actually designed a high fidelity prototype of what I believed a digital solution could look like if I did acquire a manufacturer, build a manufacturer to kind of build a direct to consumer site.
This is before you had an idea of what targets may be available to you. You kind of put this strategy first. So you
That's
focused
right.
first.
That's
Okay.
right. And then created a list of targets and went out and started speaking to them. Also speaking to folks like yourself and our folks on the Sunday group, as well as other groups. I put it out there. You know, I said, look, you know, this is what I think the plan is. I developed 2 pages, 4 pages, 15-page decks, 90-page decks. I actually actively started engaging with potential targets. I started talking to brokers, started talking to bankers, and my cousin-in-law actually is a former investment banker and passed this opportunity across my desk. And at first, I was like, you know, probably isn't. This probably isn't for me, right? I'm looking for something that is EBITDA positive, right? That's easily financeable, and this just isn't it, you know. But I came back to it a couple days later. Said, all right, I kind of wrote this off, but let me just actually print out the deck and look through it. And this goes back to your earlier question around what I think one of my um, kind of unique capabilities is I looked at the materials and I said, okay, there's actually some good raw matter here, right? This company has scaled remarkably beautifully over the last 5 years. They have hundreds of thousands of customers. There is supplier concentrations, a couple of kind of things that uh, can be fixed about the business. But if I tweak a number here, how does it look? You know, if I tweak gross margin percentage, okay, and is there a path to actually improving gross margin percentage? we start to do certain things to improve conversion rate. Are there low hanging fruit here? And so I started to devise kind of my value added plan to the sim that I received. And then it was like, okay, well, will the founders, who I believe are great people and great operators, be willing to continue to be part of this journey and be receptive to a lot of the performance improvement things that need to happen in order to put this in a position to scale, right? So typical kind of strengthen the core before pouring fuel on it to scale type of activity that we would do, in consulting or actually talk about, but very hard to pull off. And the founders are just incredible, incredible, incredible people, right? Passionate people. They built a great culture. They know the business inside and out, and they work 24/7. I found folks that were willing to grind as hard as I was, and believed in what I believed about the business. And then from there, it was like, okay, well, the price and the current terms in here aren't going to work out, right? But if you see future value and I see future value, and you're willing to work, then the upside could be ginormous. And so let's start to figure out a structure that's going to work, because I don't personally have all the capital needed to purchase this company at the price point that you want, nor is it worth it in this current environment. But it could be, right? But you're going to need a value added buyer, and so I believe that I'm that buyer. So flew out, met with them, talked to them almost daily, and
You did not know these sellers at all
did
before
not
you
know them.
approached. Okay.
Did not know them. But started building a relationship with them, right? Then started to negotiate terms, started to actually share what I think are things of unequal value, right? So I've done a lot of this analysis, be able to put together a group of individuals from my previous life and previous worlds to dig into this business. And we shared that information with them. We helped them make tweaks to the business where they started to see these green shoots. Oh, we could do this, it could do that, it could do this. Exposing plans, treating them as a partner before the transaction even happened. And then, 5 months later, we actually closed on a transaction. And because of that, we were able to execute on a lot of the initiatives almost immediately. And so the last 14 days has been a sprint. We're doing kind of a 13-week sprint. So there's 11 weeks left in this sprint. But we've already executed a lot of what we devised kind of in the strategic plan early on. And that was because of kind of the relationship that was built over the 5 months, and the trust that was built over the 5 months.
So a lot to unpack, and I'll just say it from my perspective, somebody who kind of watched this journey from beginning to end. From my perspective, I saw a masterclass and a couple things that I thought was really interesting. I think one, and I want you to unpack ultimately where I'm going with this is the ingredients for what you would recommend someone who wants to get serious about buying a business coming through this, situation fresh. What stands out to you as maybe differentiated information that people may be hearing otherwise, to really help them be more successful. But I'll kind of, set the table a little bit based on what I saw, what I felt I saw. One is you hear from a lot of folks like you got to kiss a lot of babies, you know what I mean? Kiss a lot of frogs, excuse me, along the way. I didn't feel like you really had that experience. I felt like there was maybe a couple on the table, but there was never this. I'm just talking to a bunch of people, bunch of people, bunch of people. I felt like what was your time from initiation to close? Like you said 5 months later, but what was your true time?
Um, Truly, it was about 11 months between starting the process and closing. 5 months with this target, right?
which
So
is which is again very short on the overall spectrum of what you hear. People talking about early as 12 months, but you're usually talking about 18 months to 2 years.
yeah.
So that was interesting to me. Kind of being we're like in a mastermind group together. We meet weekly, and we can talk about that in a second. Just the power of that concerted, group of folks all kind of helping people work through problems, and how much of that really impacts and drives velocity in terms of where we're looking to go, clarity in terms of what we're thinking about. But other pieces are the way you mobilized a team. You touched on this a second ago, like people who believed in the vision, who kind of got to the table and really helped do some of the heavy lifting. I thought that was really masterful how you put that team together, how you really orchestrated that team and got them gelled, incentivized them in a way where we are going to acquire this company, we're going to get this deal done. that may be, potentially the biggest element of what may have been a differentiator, but that's just what I saw from my perspective. Do you feel like your process was, um, I guess, in the overall scheme of things, a little bit more efficient than what you hear from most folks? Another thing I saw was like your target size was much bigger than other folks as well that I've seen kind of getting into the game. Just help us understand a little bit
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
ingredients and why it felt like, from my perspective, this is really like a masterclass and a first acquisition.
I appreciate the kind words, Brandon. You've been a big part of the journey, right? And so you mentioned the mastermind group. A big part of that is being accountable, right? So every week you're talking about what's going on in your life, professionally and personally. And so having that checkpoint every week was huge, right? Because it did provide both guidance and urgency, right? But also a lot of clarity. To your previous question, you talked about generalist versus specialist. And one of the things I noticed is that in order to be a generalist, let me just skip to the specialist. So being a specialist allows you to bring in a bunch of folks that see you as a specialist, right? So they're completely bought into your plan. They're like, okay, well, this guy knows what he's talking about, which lowers the risk. So I was able to bring in a lot of really interesting and valuable people because they were like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's not going out and he's saying, just trust me. I'm going to figure this out, or this is where the puck is going. He's saying, look, I've seen this before. I've seen what works. I've seen what doesn't work. I've done my own homework, right? And I'm asking you to add something very specific, right? Pricing, performance marketing, email. I need you to do a tech audit. And these are the 5 things that I need you to actually look at. So by demonstrating that I knew what I was talking about and I knew what I was asking for, I think lowered the risk in their minds for jumping into something that was, still inherently risky, right? And so that's how I think I was able to kind of put together that team of folks that are still, rocking with me now and executing on it, is because I was very, very focused on what I was trying to achieve and what I believed was the opportunity. And that's not to discount other folks and how they actually run their search process or think about acquiring a company. A lot of them have very strict criteria, right? And so they're looking for a certain amount of EBITDA. They're looking for owners that are in a specific situation. Maybe there's a market kind of guardrail there as well. But that's why they're like, look, I need 18 to 24 months, and I need to screen thousands upon thousands upon thousands of companies in order to find the 1 or 2 that I'm actually going to actively pursue. Uh, I that wasn't the right path for me, right? And there's also somewhat of a luxury to do that as well too, right? Many of them have a significant stable of cash behind them, either personal cash or because of a search fund as well too. And so, all of the life experience that I've gotten led me to take an approach where I should be extremely, extremely focused on what I was pursuing, and be relentless in making sure that you create a structure, right, that was going to be advantageous for all parties involved.
Excellent. And I want to be respectful of time, but you actually touched on something I want to kind of go into next. And I think there's a lot more that we will unpack together around the more specific parts of what you learned in structuring. Is just way too much to kind of dive into in this conversation, but I want to stay high level. And you touched on something I want to get real about, which is the financial aspect of things. I
Yeah,
know Antoine, family man, 2 young kids, wife, always bringing in money. And if I'm not mistaken, within a year of leaving Wayfair as general manager, you basically close on the company. Is that
that's
true?
correct.
Right,
Yeah.
which is extremely impressive. What were your financial considerations at the time? 1, and then 2, this is about kind of that carrot at the end. Just give us, to the extent that you feel comfortable, a sense of the wealth creation that you think is possible based on this specific deal. And then I want to hear, and that'll be a great transition to like your future vision of what you're looking to build over time.
Yeah. Um, So yeah, so within a year closed, and to be honest, I thought it was gonna be a lot quicker. I thought by October, November, I would have everything figured out. So the fact that it took to Cinco de Mayo was a little bit long for me. It was a little
Mm.
bit long for me, to be honest. But I enjoyed the journey, and it was the right journey in the right amount of time to actually do the diligence and to find the target and build the relationships and build out this strategy to make the acquisition. Um, Second part of your question was around, just restate it for me.
Just the financial considerations, and then ultimately the wealth creation, the ownership kind of aspect of what you now are looking, forward to,
Yeah. Yeah,
through
I think in terms of the financial structure, we can get into that at some other time. I can't give details, of course, kind of on the decimal points of the deal. But ultimately, what I was trying to do was figure out a situation where the least amount of cash was exchanging hands, but the upside was there for all parties that were involved, right? And there's certain things you can't avoid, like legal fees and things like that are just part of the transaction costs. But how could I actually put together a situation where the founders aren't necessarily going to get the immediate outcome that they thought that they were going to get, but the upside is going to be 10, 20x what they thought they were going to get today. And they were going to be able to be part of this journey going forward. And so that's how I thought about the deal. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of negotiation, a lot of proving on both sides, and a lot of having tough conversations where you don't even like yourself in that conversation. But you have to have those conversations and know that, look, we're all trying to make the boat go faster. We're all heading towards the right direction. We all want to win. So let's figure this out. So that's how I thought about the financial structure and the compensation packages going forward as well too. Is how do I make sure that people are taken care of today, but also give them significant upside in the future. In terms of personal wealth creation, this particular opportunity, this company, and this platform that we have, I honestly think it's a multi-billion-dollar platform. The market is massive, and as I mentioned before, I do think there's the ability to create these billion-dollar institutions within, between the toes of these giants. All the dynamics are there, right? So 20% of furniture is bought online now. That will move to 50% in the not so distant future, right? And so not only is the overall market growing a bit slowly, right? Single digits for home furnishing and home improvement products and home decor. The shift in terms of where you're actually going to buy is going to be massive, and there's going to need to be innovation in how you actually help customers navigate product choice. How do you make sure that they see what they want, and what they want they actually get? So what I mean by that is media expectations. I think there's going to be nuanced shopping experiences based on where people are in the journey and what they're purchasing and the room that they're currently designing, and the people that are involved in a project. So I just think there's a ton of opportunity within it, and we're well positioned given the 5 years of history, the revenue that's currently being generated, which is substantial, the new profitability of the company to grow this, substantially over the next couple of years. And in doing so, this individual entity will create wealth for the folks that are involved and that are participants in the opportunity in the business. And then as a platform for other opportunities, I think it also opens up the door. You mentioned the time, right, and how things came across my desk. Once people know that you're actually in the game, they talk to you differently. They present things differently to you. And so I've already been positioned or, given a look at some interesting things that might be good bolt-on acquisitions that could improve the shopping experience and customer experience for our customer base and our future customers. I think that's because I was in the game, right? So this opportunity didn't come about until November, but because I had been searching and talking and devising strategies and speaking to different capital providers, this opportunity presented itself. So I think this is a springboard for ownership in multiple entities in this type of way. So I've invested in venture-backed companies. We've invested in real estate and a variety of different things together. but actually owning significant chunks of companies. I think because this transaction has happened, it opens up that aperture, right? Where now I have the actual calluses, right? So it's not just listening to Professor Borghese, tell me that this is what I should do, actually working alongside him to get it done. I have those calluses on my hand, right? And so I know what it takes and the hurdles that you need to jump over in order to acquire a business. And so that knowledge can now shorten the path to success for future acquisitions that are bolt on or separate. So yeah, I think it's I'm super excited about it. But as Bezos, Prophet Bezos says, started a new day one on May 5th, right? So you think that it's going to be a massive celebration, but really it was a little anticlimactic, right? Because all the work and all the conversations and all of the iterations on the asset purchase agreement and other documents, signing it was just a formality, right? And a minute after signing it, it's like, okay, well, what do we do now? How do we actually prove that we're actually as smart as we think we are and that we can actually deliver this value? So we're still in a massive sprint and probably will continue to be for the foreseeable future here. But it is awesome to kind of be in this situation now.
Yeah, man. And I appreciate you carving out the time to share a little bit about your journey. It's a lot more we got to go into. So we'll do some follow-up conversations. But what is the platform for people that want to buy furniture and they want to shop Antoine? Where should folks be going?
Go to homethreads.com.
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 Excellent.
Love that as a customer.
Excellent. And with that, I just want to say, hey, again, thank you, man. It was an incredible ride to see you. Lil Flip is a rapper from Texas. He has his line, see it, want it, buy it, own it. I think I watched you execute that process extremely well. I know how hungry you are as a good friend of mine, kind of in the inner circle. This is just the beginning. Like you said, this is day one. So it's exciting to kind of see you take off, and can't wait to see you continue to do what you do. So with that, we'll conclude. Thanks again, Antoine. Best of luck in your 13-week program and beyond. We'll keep you very much involved in what we're doing as we try to open up these doors for other folks to understand how they can also replicate this level of early success. And so with that, I'm going to let you go. Appreciate you, my man. Talk
Thanks.
again real soon.
For sure. Take care.
Take it easy.